Damian Hines.
Thank you very much, Sir Gary. It's a great pleasure, as always, to see you in the chair. And can I congratulate warmly the Honourable Lady representing Coventry North West for securing this important debate and the opportunity for us to discuss it. My constituents in East Hampshire were among the top 10 number of signatories for e-petition 600577, which is explicitly linked to this debate and was on the topic of green belt and green fields. And obviously that is an important distinction. Green belt is a particular land designation, it's a particularly important natural asset. But green field is also a very important part of nature and amenity for whether it's our immediate resident constituents or those coming from further afield. And people do often use the two terms, of course, interchangeably. So, Gary, I don't think realistically you can say we will never build on a greenfield site because all of us in this room and all of our constituents, whatever type of dwelling they live in, once it was a greenfield site. And the reality is there has been a growing population over many years, a result of many factors, including the very positive factor of people living longer, as well as the tendency to smaller households. But we can make sure that we prioritise brownfield sites. And we need to give real meaning to that. It's a very easy phrase to throw out. It has to mean something. It has to be enabled. And I think that's through things like facilitating high-quality amenity enhancing, estate redensification, town centre concentrations, city centre revitalisations, and so on. I'd like to highlight, Sir Gary, if I may, my own constituency situation, which is an almost unique situation in that it's a constituency in a local authority bisected by a national park boundary. We've got 57% of the area in the national park, 43% of the area outside the national park. But very importantly, that inside the park there is a sizable town, the town of Petersfield, and that's what makes this a very unusual situation. So although the housing numbers are assessed on the basis of the whole of the district, effectively, almost all of them have to go in the minority part, which is outside the national park boundary. And that puts a great deal of pressure, potentially, on places just outside the national park boundary, places like Alton and Four Marks, Whitehill and Borden and parts of the village of Liphook. In practical terms, over East Hampshire District Council's emerging local plan period, there will be 632 homes a year having to be built, but 532 out of those 632, in other words, 84% of them, have to be delivered in the 43% of the area which is outside the national park. Now, the system does nominally allow local authorities to use what's called an alternative approach to assess housing need, where the strategic policy making authorities' boundaries don't align with the local authority. But there is quite a big risk in that, because authorities know that if they do pursue that route, they can expect challenge at the stage where the local plan comes for examination by the planning inspector. And if it were to fail at that stage, the consequences are potentially so great in terms of speculative development and lack of infrastructure delivery that local authorities are naturally very reluctant to consider that. And so we found it rather difficult to find examples of local authorities in a situation somewhat similar to ours that have adopted an alternative approach. I do want to thank the Minister's officials at, however we pronounce it, DLUC, for meeting officials from my local council earlier this year to discuss these difficult circumstances. But the situation does essentially remain the same. There is also something in the Planning for the Future 2020 white paper about possibly looking at land constraints right at the start of the process as housing need is being assessed. But we are not clear on what the status of those proposals is. If he's able to give us any further detail today, that would be very welcome. And as my right honourable friend from South Staffordshire was saying, we are also very keen to understand urgently the meaning of this more flexible alignment test intended to replace the duty to cooperate. And my final brief point, Sir Gary, is simply that in a situation like mine, with this national park that cuts through the constituency and the local authority, it would be preferable if we could have numbers assessed separately for the area inside and outside the park.